Howdy! Okay, so I'm a massive Transformers fan, right? With well over 600 figures. I feel like I'm qualified to call myself a fan. As such, I've decided to channel that into something informative slash creative, whatever you want to call it. Today, I'm starting a massive project.
I'm going to go through every piece of Transformers media ever, and list every named character who appears in said media. Therefore, I'm going to be listing every named Transformers character ever across every piece of Transformers media ever. Yes, every character.
In addition, I'm going to place said media that I'm talking about on a timeline. So, at the end, when I've finished all Transformers media ever, I'll have a single cohesive timeline of every Transformers media ever. In chronological order. Mostly, probably, hopefully. With the first episode today, I'm going to be starting with Travis Knight's Bumblebee movie from 2018. I should just preface that in each of these videos, I'm going to keep a small identifier next to each character's name in order to signify what universe they're from. Yeah, so my designation for the universe of the Bumblebee movie is Earth UED 13, or Tyron 1218 Mark 21 Delta. UED is an acronym that I've created that stands for Unidentified Earth Designation, which, with the 13, meaning that it's the 13th that I've noted down using this system so far. Given that I'm listing them chronologically, 13th, it's likely to change. Like, it's only 13 for now, but it might be something bigger in the future. Like, I might revisit it, and it'll be Universe 21. Hell, when I originally first started taking notes for this project, it was UED 10, and then as I was initially started writing this part of the script, it was UED 12. That's how rapidly it changes. So, you never know.
Howdy, Editor Charlie here. I just thought I'd come in and mention that it's UED 14 now, but also it's too late in the process to change it, so just pretend where it says UED 13 that it says UED 14. In the next video for Rise of the Beasts, I'll have it as UED 14, but it might have changed by then too, so who knows. I should probably keep this somewhere where people can look at where I have all my notes, but well. You guys will live.
The Tyron 1218 Mark 21 Delta, part of the universe designation, is using the in-universe, or I guess in multiverse, universal designation that Transformers uses, but with me applying that to the Bumblebee movie. So, to break it down, Tyron means that it's part of the same general multiversal cluster as the Michael Bay movies. 1218 Mark 21 is the date the Bumblebee was released, roughly, in this translation. So it would have been the 21st of December, 2018. And Delta, meaning that the form of media that it takes place in, is a live-action movie. So for now, characters would be listed as such: Bumblebee, UED 13, Tyron 1218 Mark 21 Delta. And for whatever reason, just in case I'm wrong, I'm going to put a little question mark right next to it, just in case we ever get an official designation that proves mine wrong. Just in case. With that out of the way, on to the fun part of the video.
At 47 seconds in, we see a pair of Seeker Tetrajets. Now, these Seekers could just be generic characters, or they could be a number of options. Specifically, Starscream, generics based on Thrust, Thundercracker, or Skywarp, generics with a teal and white color scheme, or generics with a grey and red color scheme, the latter of whom may potentially include Blitzwing, who shows up later in the movie, voiced by David Sobolov. Additionally, according to their Studio Series figures, the real Thundercracker and Thrust are present later on in the scene, so these Seekers here could be the real capital T Thundercracker and Thrust. I'll point out the specific Seekers that I think are Thundercracker and Thrust, as well as Starscream and Blitzwing, when they show up later. Furthermore, given his lack of toy or appearances in ancillary media, we can't be sure if there is a real singular capital S Skywarp, so I won't count him as a character for now. That plus, I'm colorblind, so trying to look for a blink and you'll miss a character whose design is identical to every other character's, aside from color, in a dark environment, in a fast-paced scene, this seems like a disaster. That being said, if we ever canonically get a Skywarp for this scene, I may make an update video. So to recap, these two Seekers here could be Blitzwing, Starscream, Thundercracker, and or Thrust. But in case they aren't, they'd show up later, probably.
oh cool, new Transformers have just been announced. I sure hope that none of these impact the video in any way, including having to re-edit the video and rewrite the script in order to accommodate the new Transformer that totally doesn't impact the segment of the video. Cool. Steeljaw, Springer, Straxus, lots of S's. Soldier, Bumblebee, Skywarp. Skywarp? Shit. Well, it's awesome and all that, after getting leaked a year ago, we finally have official word on Studio Series Bumblebee movie Skywarp. It has kind of upended what I literally just said. Considering it just got announced officially a week ago as recording this, officially I rewrote it the day it got announced, I'm gonna have no way of knowing if the bio on the back of Skywarp's Studio Series toy is gonna confirm or deny whether he's the specific capital S Skywarp that appears in this scene here that I'm talking about, or if he's another Seeker in the movie. But I'm just gonna jump right ahead and say that it is, because he's the most prominent Skywarp that we see in a leadership position, I guess. I think the one that gets the most focus on screen is the one that Bumblebee decapitates, but I don't think that's gonna be him. Something just gives me that vibe. It's going to be a lot of work to add Skywarp to every single counter, from this point onwards, because I'm that far into the video. But, just going to add him in at the end, future Charlie will remember that.
Here we get our first brief looks at Ironhide and Ratchet, voiced by Dennis Singletary, as blink and you'll miss it cameos. Ironhide specifically doesn't get any lines and is just barely visible behind another generic Autobot. Here we can see RC, voiced by Gray Delisle Griffin, Brawn, voiced by Kirk Bailey, and Cliffjumper, voiced by Andrew Morgado. Here we get our first look at Wheeljack, voiced by Steve Bloom. This Seeker here could be the real thrust, but again, with how many quote-unquote thrusts, I should really choose my wording better, with how many quote-unquote real thrusts there could be in the scene, I don't know. Here, we finally see the man, the myth, the legend himself, Optimus Prime, voiced by the man, Peter Cullen. This Seeker here probably isn't the real Thundercracker, and given that he gets shot at point blank range and probably dies and all that, I doubt it, especially considering he's supposed to be attacking the launch pad later. B-127, voiced by Dylan O'Brien, is mentioned here, and only appears on screen just a second later. These Seekers here could be the real Thundercracker and Thrust, but again, who knows?
I'm going to continue doing this for the rest of the scene, until the real Thundercracker and Thrust show up, so be prepared.
Here, we get Soundwave, voiced by John Bailey, and you can just make out Ravage in his chest. Starscream himself makes his first clear, unambiguous appearance right here. Shockwave appears only just a few seconds later, voiced by John Bailey. Here, we can see the real Thrust. I could have sworn that this Seeker here was Thundercracker, who was blue, but apparently it's a purple Skywarp type Seeker. Additionally, up in the corner here is Dropkick, voiced by Justin Theroux, and a character that I'm pretty sure is Shadow, voiced by Angela Bassett, both of whom become main antagonists throughout the movie, and so you get teasers of as minor antagonists here. Anyway, additionally, I'm pretty sure that this Seeker here is Blitzwing, who again we meet later on in the film. At 151, I'm going to say that this Seeker here is the real Thundercracker, but I could be wrong. Here we can see Teletrain 1. Here we meet Danny Bell, voiced by Edwin Hodge. Here we see a bunch of guys, at least one of whom is John Cena's character Jack Burns. Burns himself would unmask himself just a couple seconds later as he takes the stage. Here we get our first look at a McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom II, which turns out to be Blitzwing. Here we hear the voice of our main character, Charlie Watson, played by Haley Steinfeld. It's only a couple seconds later that we see her physically appear on screen. I can't quite make out all of Charlie's cassettes here clearly, but I can make out the Romantics, the B-52s, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Journey, Mike and the Mechanics, and Culture Club. As such, I'll consider this mentions for their members as of 1987, because I can't make out the specific albums for each band.
How I consider mentions for specific band members for bands is based on three factors. A, if there were members of the band during the year that the media takes place. B, if the band is no longer around, then all former members of the band. And C, if it's specifically an album that's being pointed out, everyone that worked on the album too. I guess technically the specific albums should be mentioned here, but I can't make out which albums are specific. Like, I wasn't live in the 80s, I barely know what a cassette is. I'm gonna read this next bit off my script live, because I don't have that good of a memory. But Wally Palmer, Mike Skill, Cos Candler, and David Petratos for the Romantics. Fred William Schneider III, Kate Elizabeth Pearson, Cindy Lee Wilson, and Julian Keith Strickland for the B-52s. Declan Patrick Elvis Costello McManus, Steve Neve, Bruce Thomas, and Pete Michael Thomas for Elvis Costello and the Attractions. Steve Ray Perry, Neil Joseph Sean, Randy Darius Jackson, Jonathan Kane, Mike Baird, and Michael Narada Walden for Journey. Paul Melvin Carrick, Paul Young, Michael John Cloete, Crawford Ruthford, Ashley Mulford, Adrian Lee, and Peter Van Hook for Mike and the Mechanics. And George Allen Boy George O'Dowd, Mike Emil Craig, Roy Ernest Hay, and John Aubrey Moss for Culture Club.
I didn't notice this until I was editing, but she also has an album for Wham, counting as mentions for George Michael and Andrew John Ridgely. A couple seconds later, we see a couple of Charlie's posters. And forgive me for being too young to recognize most of these, but I can make out a poster for the Pretenders. As such, this is a mention for their 1987 band members Chrissy Ellen Hind, who also appears in the poster, Robbie McIntosh, Thomas Michael T.M. Stevens, Blair Cunningham, and George Bernie Worrell Jr. for the Pretenders.
I didn't notice until I was editing, but in this part you can also make out a poster for New Order, which I do cover later. In fact, I'll probably edit it so that I mentioned all the band members like after this audio clip right here. But yeah, just pointing out that New Order are right here
Is New Order. As such, this would be a mention for Bernard Sumner, Peter Hook, Stephen Paul David Morris, and Gillian Leslie Gilbert. Also here, Charlie begins playing Big Mouth Strikes Again by the Smiths, although we don't hear lead singer Stephen Patrick Morrissey's voice for another couple seconds. I should also note that this song is heard diegetically within the film, playing from Charlie's Walkman, I want to say.
This video really shows my age. Oh.
Joan of Arc is mentioned as part of Big Mouth Strikes Again. I wouldn't know what her proper name to put down is, like her proper full name, but I'm gonna just keep it as Joan of Arc for now. Maybe I should shorten it to just Joan. No, that'd be too generic. Here we can hear the voice of Charlie's mother, Sally Watson, played by Pamela Adlon. Sally would physically appear just a couple seconds later, as would her boyfriend Ron, played by Steven Schneider. Here, Charlie grabs some Mr. T cereal, and as such, includes a graphic of Lawrence, Mr. T, Terode. I should. How do I say that? Terode. I'm going to say Terode. Someone can correct me. Here, we meet Conan, voiced by Sterling. Here, Charlie's little brother Otis Watson, played by Jason Drucker, is mentioned. Otis's voice can be heard here, and he would physically appear here. Things Can Only Get Better by John Howard Jones begins playing, although it's not really clear if it's played diegetically or not. And it'd be about 15 seconds into the song before Jones's vocals would begin. At 15:32, we meet Tina Lark and Trip Summers, played by Gracie Dezenny and Ricardo Hoyos respectively. Here, we meet Jorge Londerberg Jr.'s character Guillermo Mimo Gutierrez. God, I'm hoping I say these names right. I'm not good with human names. I'm human, I promise. I'm just not good with human names. Runaway by Bon Jovi begins playing, but again, it's unclear if it's diegetic or not. Lead singer John Francis Bon Jovi Jr.'s vocals won't begin for another couple seconds. Here we meet Hank, played by Len Carreau. Here we can see Bill in the background, played by Antonio D. Charity. Save a Prayer by Duran Duran begins playing, but for the third song in a row, I don't know if it's diegetic or not. Lead singer Stephen Anthony James Duffy's vocals won't begin for another about 10 seconds. Here we get our first clear look at our main antagonists Dropkick and Chatter, just in case I was wrong in their cameos at the beginning of the film. The theme song for Cheers, Where Everybody Knows Your Name, begins playing, including vocals from Gary Portnoy. We see Charlie's family watching Alf, specifically Season 2, Episode 20, You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. More on that later, but this means we can put his voice actor, Paul Fusco, down as his voice can be heard.
If I really wanted to, I could track down the specific episode of Alf that this is meant to be, and put in as meant as voices the characters whose voices would be heard during this specific episode. But that's a lot more effort than what it's worth. Then again, that describes the whole video. If I ever redo this video for whatever reason, I might do that. Maybe.
Ron gives Charlie a book called Smile for a Change by Ray Yamamoto.
Now, I couldn't find Smile for a Change as a real book, but the so-called author of it, Ray Yamamoto, was a digital asset manager for the movie. So I'm guessing that's just a simple, like, Easter egg that they put in, just to say thanks to Ray.
Higher Love by Steve Lawrence Winwood would play, but again, no clue if the song is diegetic or not. I'm leaning towards no for this one. It could still be. Winwood's lyrics wouldn't begin for another 16 to 17 seconds or so. Here, we can see that Charlie's wearing a Motorhead top.
When did she have time to change? Who knows? Anyway, this counts as a specific mention for Ian Fraser Lemmy Kilmister, Michael Richard Wurzel Burston, Phil Anthony Campbell, Phil John Filthy Animal Taylor, and Pete Gill.
Finally, roughly half an hour into the movie, Charlie christens the amnesiac B-127 as Bumblebee, and the rest, they say, is history. Here we can hear All My Exes Live in Texas by George Harvey Strait Sr., although Strait's vocals won't begin for another couple seconds. Here we meet Amber, voiced by Megan Price. Not voiced, played. Her voice does appear. And only a second later, we meet her husband Roy, played by Lenny Jacobson. Here, Charlie's wearing a top with The Damned on it. This counts as mentions of, and maybe a photo of, David Vanyan, Brian Merrick, Christopher John Ratscabies Miller, Roman Jug, and Paul Shirley Shepley. Here we meet one Seymour Rutherford Simmons, who, if that name sounds familiar to you, was John Turturro's character in the Michael Bay Transformers films, but here he's played by Nick Piller. Here, behind Agent Burns, we can see a photo of the, at the time, American President, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Charlie's wearing a top with the Rolling Stones written on it, counting as a mention for Mick Philip Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie David Wood, Bill George Wyman, and Charlie Robert Watts. Here we meet Dr. Powell, played by John Ortiz. Ravage would be later mentioned here, and would later appear just a couple seconds later here. About 45 minutes into the movie, Bumblebee is watching The Breakfast Club, and as such, Transformers alumni Judd Asher Nelson appears from the ending of the movie. Even though Take On Me by a-ha started at whatever time Future Charlie puts it as, lead singer Morton Harkett's vocals won't begin for another 15 seconds or so. Okay, speedrun time. Here we see a drawer full of Charlie's cassettes, specifically Kick by INXS, counting as mentions for band members Michael Kellen, John Hutchins, John James Farris, Andrew Charles Farris, Gary William Beers, Kirk Pengilly, Tim William Farris, and Jenny Patricia Morris. Dirk Wears White Socks by Adam and the Ants, counting as mentions for band members Stuart, Leslie, Adam Ant Goddard, David Barbarossa, Matthew James Ashman, and Andy Warren. Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, counting as mentions for band members William Axl Rose, Saul/Hudson, Jeffrey Dean Izzy Stradlin Isbell, Michael Andrew Duff McKagan, and Stephen Adler. Sports by Huey Lewis and the News, counting as mentions for band members Hugh Anthony Huey Lewis Craig III, Chris Hayes, Johnny Victor Collar, Sean Hopper, Mario Cipollina, and Bill Gibson. Good for Your Soul by Oingo Boingo, counting as mentions for band members Steve Bartek, Danny Robert Elfman, Michael Bachik, John Avila, Johnny Vatos Hernandez, Leon Schneiderman, Sam Sluggo Phipps, Dale Turner, Bruce Lamborn Fowler, Richard Ribs Gibbs, and Kerry Hatch. More songs about buildings and food by Talking Heads, counting as mentions of band members David Byrne, Jerry Griffin Harrison, Tina Michelle Weymouth, and Charlton Chris France. Rank by The Smiths, counting as mentions of band members Morrissey, who I mentioned earlier, Johnny Marr, Andy Michael Rourke, Mike Adrian Paul Joyce, and Craig Gannon. Bad Reputation by Joan Jett, Small Change by Prism, counting as mentions for band members Darcy Deutsch, Lindsay Christopher Mitchell, Al Harlow, Rocket Norton, radio, Andy Lorimer, and Henry Cave Small. Louder Than Bombs by the Smiths, Strange Ways Here We Come by the Smiths, Meter's Murder by the Smiths. Evidently, Charlie, or someone on the staff, is a fan of the Smiths. An album I can't quite make out, but it's by Pink Floyd, counting as mentions for members David John Gilmour, Richard William Wright, and Nick Berkeley Mason. Strip by Adam and the Ants, counting as mentions for band members Richard James Burgess, Marco Francesco Andrea Pironi, Phil David Charles Collins, Johann Rutger Gunnarsson, and Annefried Cine Lingstad. And lastly, Album by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, counting as mentions for band members Ricky Byrd, Gary Ryan, Kasim Sultan, Lee Crystal, and Tommy Price. Wow, that's a lot.
Note that in future, I'm not generally going to include songs. Like, I'm not going to mention songs if the relevant artist has already been mentioned or appeared or whatever. But I'm going to mention it now just so I can establish that. To which case, Girlfriend in a Coma. We get Girlfriend in a Coma by the Smiths, and as such, you can hear the vocals of Morrissey.
I didn't think to add this part until I was editing, but the cassette for Strange Ways Here We Come has a photo of Richard Davalos. Here, Charlie plays Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Paul Astley, not Hasley, playing from Bumblebee's radio. Charlie mentions Stevie Lynn Nicks. Just a couple seconds later, we see that Charlie has For Your Pleasure by Roxy Music, counting as a mention for band members Brian Ferry, Brian Peter George Eno, Andy McKay, Phil Jeffrey Manzanera, Targa Adams, Paul Thompson, and John Porter. Just a couple seconds after that, we see Charlie's record of Sam's Songs by Sam Cooke, with a photo of Cooke on the cover. Cooke's voice will be heard at roughly a minute later when Charlie puts the record on, playing Unchained Melody.
Fun fact, Unchained Melody doesn't actually appear on this record, with Little Things You Do being the more appropriate song.
Here, you can hear the voice of General Whalen, played by Glyn Turman. He would appear on screen only 2 seconds later, though. And about a minute after that, we meet Agent Coker, played by Courtney Coker. She's a blink and you'll miss it cameo, but I'm mentioning her anyway, because, again, I want every character. Here, Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears begins playing, but lead singer Kurt Smith's vocals don't begin for another 30-ish seconds. I'm not really sure if the song is diegetic or not, but I could see it coming from Bumblebee's radio. Here, Bumblebee plays Don't Mess With My Radio by James Todd LL Cool J Smith. Here, Bumblebee plays Walk Like a Man by The Four Seasons, with vocals provided by Francesco, Stephen, Frankie Valli, Castelluccio? Just a couple seconds later, It Takes Two by Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock plays, although I'm unsure if the music is diegetic or not. Just a couple of seconds later, Gloria Laverne Lynn Collins' vocals would begin though. Mimo mentions a classmate named Jim. Yeah, I'm including stuff like that. Bumblebee plays The Touch by Stan Bush, which, honestly, I'm surprised it isn't in more Transformers media. It's like the Transformers song. Mimo quickly mentions Albert Einstein. Bumblebee briefly plays The Payback by James Joseph Brown, with Brown's vocals providing just a second, beginning just a second later. Here we meet Sheriff Locke, played by Fred Dreyer. Here, Charlie, Mimo, and Bumblebee are listening to I Can't Wait by New Shoes, including vocals from lead singer Valerie Day. Just a couple seconds later, Bumblebee again begins playing I Can't Drive 55 by Sammy Roy Hagar, with Hagar's vocals beginning just a couple seconds later. Here we hear radio. We hear Dance All Days by Wang Chung, although I'm unsure if the music is diegetic or not. And it's only a couple seconds later that lead singer Jack Hughes' lyrics would begin. Here we can hear the voice of Charlie's manager Craig, played by Colin Holtz, and it's only a couple seconds later that he appears on screen. As Bumblebee rewatches The Breakfast Club, and again we get another sneaky cameo from Judd Nelson, we can hear Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds, with lead singer Jim Kerr's vocals beginning 2 seconds later. Here, Otis is wearing a Bruce Lee shirt. We see inside Mimo's room, and he's got a poster for Raiders of the Lost Ark, which, as such, includes Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. Otis briefly mentions his sensei Murray. Bumblebee briefly begins playing Let's Go by the Cars, with lead singer Rick Theodore Oatkase's vocals beginning just a couple seconds later. Of the Autobots that we see in re-entry mode, we don't have any direct confirmation as to who they are, but we can extrapolate as to who they are. With seven comets present, we can deduce that Brawn is one of them, as he appears in the Battle at Half Dome comic. RC, Mirage, and Rise of the Beasts Wheeljack, who is, for whatever reason, a different character than the Wheeljack who appeared in the prologue for this movie, could be Autobots 2, 3, and 4, and that leaves Ratchet, Ironhide, and this movie's Wheeljack as the other three likely candidates.
Stratosphere is also a contender, but given his large size, I'm inclined to believe that he isn't part of this. Pretend this is Stratosphere, and this is like every other Autobot who appears in this scene. So I think if Stratosphere was one of the comets, he'd be a bit big. Note that according to IMDb, yeah, got it right the first time, totally. There's also Hutton, played by Sachin Bat, Scott, played by Paul Black, Howie, played by Christian Hutchison, Layla Martin, played by Samantha Kelly, Martin, played by Paul Kennedy Jr., Crest, played by Anthony Latona, Adams, played by Rory Markham, Taylor, played by Chris Markle, Jill, played by Susan Trishul Monson, and Myers, played by Braden Anthony Myers. But I just don't know where these people are. Again, if people could spot them and like point out specifically where in the movie they are, I might make an updated video, like just to shove them in. But for now, I'm just gonna leave them here in this section right here.
Also, I've given nicknames to some of the generics that we see in the opening scene. Specifically, Yellow Ironhide is Rust Bucket, Blue Ironhide is Gear Wheel, Not Skywarp is Airport, and Teal and White Seeker is Bolt Blast. They aren't exactly the best names around, but I like Rust Bucket and Airport. Gear Wheel and Bolt Blast I'm not too fond of, but Rust Bucket and Airport I'm fond of. They aren't canon at all by any means, of course, like they're just my nicknames. But they're just what I'm calling them. I'm giving them names so you don't have to. I was also going to call Gear Wheel Crank, but that name was taken like by a very minor character I should establish, but it's already taken. I can't take it. Also, again, as soon as Hasbro gives a word, Airport doesn't exist and he's just Skywarp.
Well, that aged poorly. Forget Bolt Blast because that's kind of a bad name, and I'm kind of upset that I went with it. And we'll take the name Airport from this guy over here, who is now Skywarp, and we'll take Airport and give it to this guy, who was Bolt Blast but now is Airport because I actually like the name Airport. Also, I'm going to just add Skywarp to the counter now.
Now, the timeline of the movie should be fairly simplistic, right? The movie says it takes place in 1987, therefore it takes place in 1987, right? Mm-hmm. Well, can we get any more specific with that? Well, according to TF Wiki, which is usually right, and I usually trust, it somehow states that the bulk of the movie, specifically Charlie finding Bumblebee, takes place in August, with the fact that Bumblebee developed a beehive under his hood, means that the opening fight with Blitzwing and on Cybertron takes place a couple months beforehand. Pretty open and shut, right? Well, unfortunately the Transformers Wiki doesn't exactly provide a source as to why the movie takes place in August. And we get a couple hints of when specifically the movie takes place, based on other media that appears in the movie. And unfortunately, not only do they contradict the August date that the Wiki provides, but they also contradict each other. Yay! From what I was able to see, we get 3 different sources, which, again, kind of contradict each other. So, onto that. 2 of these sources are some cassettes that Charlie has, both of which came out in the latter half of 1987. The first of which we get is Strange Ways, Here They Come. Here We Come? Here We Come, by the Smiths, which was specifically released on September 29th, 1987. Charlie explicitly points out to Bumblebee that this cassette is brand new. to her.
You're gonna love this. It's brand new.
She doesn't point out that it's specifically brand new to her, but just keep that in the back of your head. Pretty easy answer, right? So, therefore, the movie takes place in late September, early October, right? Charlie just bought this cassette recently. Given that she's a massive fan of the Smiths, she probably got it day one. So, therefore, the movie takes place late September, early October, right? But then we also see that another cassette that Charlie has is Kick by NXS, which came out October 19th, 1987. 3 weeks after Strange Ways, Here We Come. Granted, when Charlie says that Strange Ways, Here We Come is brand new, she might be specifically meaning that it's brand new to her. And that she happened to get the cassette after Kick, and, Kick may be also brand new to her. Therefore, the movie probably takes place... Therefore, narrowing our window, in 1987 to, just a little bit further to the end, meaning the movie probably takes place mid to late October earliest. Of course, with the prologue taking place a couple months before that. There is, however, a spanner thrown into those works. As I mentioned earlier, Charlie's family at one point is seen watching Off, which, can't be too bad. The show started in 1986, that's a whole year before the movie's supposed to take place, so, possible, right? However, the episode that the Watsons are watching is Season 2, Episode 20, You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, which first aired February 29th, 1988, which is months, potentially even a year, after when the movie is meant to take place. Granted, there are other continuity issues in the movie, for example, the film tries to establish that the Decepticons are responsible for the internet, even though it's been a concept since the 70s. Or, as I mentioned earlier, Charlie plays Unplayed Melody, which is a record that didn't have the song that I mentioned earlier. I can't remember what the song's called. Editor, remind me about this later. I say that as if the editor isn't me. Fun fact, Unchained Melody doesn't actually appear on this record, with Little Things You Do being the more appropriate song. That being said, this could work. On the one hand, it could just mean that in this universe, Alf came out earlier than it did in real life, and so, we got Season 2, Episode 20 in September, October 1987 at the latest, and not in February 1988? Maybe? However, I propose that the beginning of the film, the battle on Cybertron, the battle with Blitzwing, both take place in 1987, as says by the title card. Specifically, let's say Augustish, just because the wiki seems to think that it's Augustish, so why not? Meanwhile, there's a time jump, which we know there's a time jump, because, again, Bumblebee develops a beehive. Funny sentence. As such, the time jump is to February 29th, 1988, with the episode of Alf airing, and the Watson family, watching the episode of Alf as it airs for the first time, therefore placing the bulk of the movie in roughly the first week of March. Another thing, too, that I feel like I should mention, it isn't really that relevant, but I want to put it in anyway, is we never get a concrete date as to when Charlie's father dies, but I'd estimate roughly about a year or two prior to the beginning of the movie, so I'd say probably about, let's say 1986, that feels about right. One more thing is, if I'm correct with all of this, then that would put Charlie's 18th birthday as March 1st, 1988. Therefore, her birth year is 1970. Therefore,
March 1st, 1970, Charlie's born. 1986-ish, Charlie's father dies. 1987, the battle on Cybertron and the fight with Blitzwing. Monday, February 29th, 1988, we meet Charlie, she embarrasses herself at work, she meets Bumblebee, and Charlie accidentally activates Bumblebee's signal, getting Cliffjumper split like a banana. Tuesday, March 1st, Charlie's birthday, Hank gives her Bumblebee, she wakes him up and gives him the name Bumblebee. In Texas, Shatter and Dropkick arrive on Earth and turn Roy into goo. Wednesday, March 2nd, Sector 7 get wind of Shatter and Dropkick, Charlie tries to teach Bumblebee how to use his Volkswagen disguise. Sector 7 make contact with Shatter and Dropkick. Charlie learns about Optimus Prime. Bumblebee doesn't learn about him. Bumblebee already knows about him. Bumblebee learns how to talk through the radio. Charlie opens up to Bumblebee about her dad, and Sector 7 debates on what to do about the Decepticons, deciding to form an alliance with them, and also Mimo discovers Bumblebee too. Thursday, March 3rd, Charlie and Bumblebee take Mimo for a drive. Charlie and Mimo interrupt a cliffside party. Tina acts like a massive bitch, and Bumblebee gets in his first police chase, of which there is many to come. Friday, March 4th, aside from the epilogue, the rest of the film takes place from this point onwards. Bumblebee causes mayhem in the Watson home, Sector 7 finds his location, Bumblebee and Charlie get captured by Sector 7, and the Decepticons drop their facade and Dropkick liquefies Powell. Dropkick executes Bumblebee, Charlie unexecutes Bumblebee, and Bumblebee goes Iron Giant and turns the Decepticons to paste. Saturday, March 5th, the epilogue. Charlie and Bumblebee say their goodbyes, and Optimus and the other Autobots arrive on Earth. At some point after this, Charlie finally finishes fixing her dad's Corvette.
An additional note to mention that I'm going to refute is that the junior novel adaptation of the movie states that the opening of the film takes place in 1987, but there's a 5-year gap between the prologue and the rest of the movie, putting the rest of the movie in 1992, which I don't think is right, because we know the sequel takes place in 1994. Unless it wants to... Yeah, unless it wants to push back Rise of the Beast to 1999, but I don't think we can do that. So we're just going to keep Bumblebee over here in 1997, 1998-ish, roughly, and keep Rise of the Beast in 1994, and bam, we got the two movies in good years. Well, good years for the timeline, like... I wasn't alive then, I don't know if they were good years. I also had a look at the deleted scenes of the movie, to which case I was very interested to see if they fit. Of the scenes that could be canon, none of them add any new characters or any clues for the timeline. That being said, one element of the deleted scenes that don't fit with the final cut of the movie are two new characters who are Charlie's former best friends. Specifically, Liz and Brenda, played by Rachel Crow and Abby Quinn respectively. Neither of these characters can be canon to the actual canon of the film, because all of their deleted scenes are just sort of like alternate takes from scenes that we got in the film. That being said, none of the deleted scenes contradict each other, so you could argue that there is an alternate cut of the movie in which Liz and Brenda are canon, but I just don't care. As such, that is the first episode of my Transformers project completed. The next video that I'm going to be doing is, fittingly, Rise of the Beasts, which obviously is a sequel to the Bumblebee. So that's going to be fun. And see you when I see you.
I just want to say thanks to a couple of my friends for helping out with the video, whether it was going over the script with me, or confirming the colours of the Seekers for my colourblind ass. I also wanted to thank you for watching the video. It's been nice editing videos again, and I'd like to do it more often. So, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!